Good morning, everyone. In anticipation of me not having a voice tomorrow, and also for Mr. Malaban's old Gov Kids, this would be nothing new for you. I am going to record what we would be talking about today, and we're continuing in our unit for interest groups, the media, and elections. So we've been talking about um, different types of elections, how money can be involved. We'll get to interest groups in a little bit, but we wanted to spend today to talk about what the media, um, what influence they have, what powers they have, what responsibilities they have in, especially in elections, and how they report elections. So results, who's winning, who's losing, who has a chance to win, things like that. Excuse me, apologize for clearing my throat a lot. It's just uh, that time of year with allergies. So let's get started. Whenever we look at how the media can influence the election, one of the big things is elections are won and lost based on voter participation. And so the fact that the media affects that voter participation, a pinnacle piece of any democracy, and that's whether or not people actually go out and use their right to vote, is a big deal. And so that is, it sounds pretty simplistic, but it is something that we need to be aware of and keep in mind. So one of the ways uh, we need to, that this of course is one of the main things we need to consider is now, like, how it affects voter participation. But just recognizing that is something we need to keep in mind. So the first thing is, how do we access news? So a little bit more old school, but something that is still very much around. Maybe not even hard copy newspapers, but uh, digital access to newspaper publications is still a wide source of reporting and coverage of elections. We of course have radio as well. That people still, talk radio on FM, XM radio, talk shows, and their political talk shows, news coverage, all of that, and of course TV. Now, TV could come in various forms now. There's just your typical cable TV subscriptions. There's local TV, and there's also various forms of streaming that will count into this. But there are lots of big TV news stations, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of those that draw in a lot of viewers still, especially a lot of older populations in the United States. Now, of course, internet always makes things complicated, right? So the fact that the internet exists for showing up really in, like, opinions and news in blogs, but especially in the with the advent and reliance on social media, really changes the game. As with anything in AP Gov, whenever you start talking about the internet and social media, we're talking about mass access, but also a way to really get your voice out there to the masses very easily, have all influence how we perceive who we should vote for, right? And where to vote, and Facebook and Instagram and all of those will do. Um, Twitter will have links to how to figure out where you're voting and if you're registered and things like that. So they all play a big part in this, and especially though how voting is going, like on election day. That gives us that instant access, especially to social media and the internet and these TV services, instant access to um, how elections are going, who's winning, and we'll see why that's important here in just a second. So whenever we talk about the news, we're also talking about journalism. So people who go to school to be journalists, right? They learn how to credible sources, effective research, and good writing, knowing your audience, things like that. So people who've gone to school, they have a degree in journalism, most likely, and these are the people who are going to get jobs for your local TV stations, writing on websites, managing blogs, even can be very lucrative, and could have also an impact on social media as well. So, well, and of course, newspaper is like the pinnacle of that, right? The very long tradition in the United States of relying on uh, journalists who work for newspaper publications. So, whenever we think about journalism, there are a few things that we need to look out for specifically in elections. One of them that is a lot of people are very critical of major news organizations for is called horse race journalism. And so, whenever we're talking about horse race journalism, it's not necessarily focus on the race itself. It's wanting to like have the quickest reporting of like who's winning, what the exit polls are showing at this time. And so it's not really a focus on the stories of the election. It's a focus on polls themselves, like what are the numbers, and not necessarily the issues that the election is about, right? We've already the news organizations have already covered the issues. Now they just want to know who's going to win, and the people are looking to those news organizations, are the internet or Twitter or who else, who can provide the quickest access to who won, even before all the votes have been counted. You especially see this on presidential elections that get that national news coverage. So like corporations, and news organizations like CNN and Fox, who have a ton of money and a ton of access to resources to, um, you know, predict who's going to win the election hours or even like a few days before all the votes have been counted. And so that's what Americans crave for the most part. I mean, everybody wants to know who's going to win. And so you have this horse race journalism that kind of really takes precedence once those votes start rolling in. So, in general, with this type of journalism and being the focus, citizens do tend to be less informed on the issues because the issues kind of get lost for just who's going to win. Um, and this may lead to something which is one of the big uh, criticisms of horse race journalism, this kind of bandwagon effect. Now, if you're a bandwagon like sports fan, that means that you know you hop on the bus of the hottest team, right? Somebody wins, several championships in a row, then all of a sudden everybody's a Patriots fan or a Chiefs fan because they're the ones who are winning. Um, Bandwagon effect isn't always that in voting, but whenever we think about bandwagon effect in elections, it can cause people who were on the fence about who to vote for, if to that they haven't cast their vote yet, and polls are already showing, that so and so is up 10 points, 20 points in the polls, then why would those other people, say like, well, my one vote isn't going to get them that 10, 20% that they need. That's millions of votes, especially in the presidential election. And so why would I vote for the other person? I might as well just vote for the winner. And so if they were on the fence, then that sways their vote to vote for somebody who they are seeing per the news who could possibly win. And we know back in 2016 between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton that all the polls that were coming out originally for uh, uh, the presidential predictions had Hillary Clinton by a landslide in many polls, and Donald Trump ended up winning that election. And so by reporting, like, a bandwagon effect would be, if there were people who were looking at those polls who were going to undecided who they were going to vote for, and then they ended up just voting for Hillary Clinton anyway, uh, just because they were like, well, Donald Trump doesn't have a chance at winning, so I might as well vote for the person who is going to win. And so their choice of who they were going to vote for is then compromised and influenced by predictions that ended up not even being true in 2016 because Donald Trump ended up winning in the Electoral College. So whenever we look at what's happening here, whenever we think about predicting, of course, that's in quotation marks because they get it wrong sometimes, like in 2016, predicting outcomes. This is a product of polling trying to predict these outcomes. Now, another thing that can happen with horse race journalism is, let's say voters in 2016 were looking at what was happening between the polling data between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and Trump voters just decided not to go vote because they thought, oh, well, I'm just one vote. That's not going to work, and get that 10, 15 points that Trump is down. And so I'm just not going to go. And let's say he barely lost in the Electoral College. If that were the outcome, then people would be like, well, what the heck? I didn't vote because I thought, it's too big of a reach. So that can predict and get wrong, and then influence people's choice to vote or not, or who they're voting for. Now, another type of journalism, watchdog journalism. This is a lot of what we think of, whenever we think about, like, Watergate scandal and things like that. But this is scrutinizing and investigating specifically for elections, politicians, and the government. So whenever we think about scrutinizing, investigating politicians and the government, this, especially during election time, scandals, whatever it is, Hillary Clinton's emails, Donald Trump's taxes, Joe Biden's son, whatever these, if you get any of those references, they are just points in the media where people were looking for scandal, or looking for illegal activity even, or just poor, character or judgment or reflection of the candidate themselves. That is used to try and reporting on that can influence those elections, and how much you report on those things, whether they have a direct connection with the election or not. Barack Obama's birth certificate and, like, all those things, right, can affect how people view the candidates and who they vote for. So watchdog journalism can be a good thing, but it can be bad if it's used just to kind of get a headline. All right, now we all are very aware of that any source is biased, right? You also are going to have serious bias in the media. Hopefully news organizations, even though you can't escape bias, try to temper it as best they can. So in the media, this bias is going to lead to an increase in ideologically oriented news. Now, it's not a bad thing to hear news from somebody who you agree with ideologically. right? It's also not a bad thing to go and look at what news people who you don't agree with ideologically are reporting. But whenever we see how much people only consume media from one source that is ideologically oriented, right? Playing up to what their viewers want to hear and believe, then people do worry about that creating a vacuum, right? Um, to use, I always get that one mixed up. So, creating a vacuum for you just hearing, or it's not necessarily a vacuum, it's more of echo chamber is what I was looking for. Creating an echo chamber of just hearing one side over and over and over again, and it distorting your overall observations and beliefs about what's really happening. Because we all know that it's better to get both sides of a story, right? A side could get a story wrong, but it's good to kind of have that perspective. And if you don't, you just run the risk of just repeating and just having a group of people who just all think the same thing and never have any perspective in their life. So if the bias is so strong, much like those like late night talk shows on like CNN and Fox, they're not really reporting news. It's more of just talking head opinions, right? That are just kind of playing up to what they believe their viewer base believes. So there is danger in that. If you think about how that could sway what people think about elections, candidates, and the democratic process. So bias in the media leads to more sensationalistic. So that would be like, those big glaring headlines that make things seem more dramatic than they really are, trying to keep people in, right? How that everything is breaking news, right? They're oftentimes more biased, like those late night talking heads, right? There's more commentary. So this is where you're not just saying the facts of what happened, but like, what do you think this means, and how do you read into this, and what do you think about, this candidate's speech, and like what they said, and like what is that a reference to, and how do you think this will play out, and how do the voters identify with it, and did they succeed with this speech, and did they not? Uh, all of this extra commentary can sway what the viewers think for themselves, right? Rather than just they get the facts of what happened. Just listen to this. Let's say the news broadcast is like broadcasting a debate before an election. If you just play the debate and then the program ends, and then it, go back to Monday Night Football, or reruns of Friends, or whatever else is on TV, then people just have to think what they think based on what they saw and heard. If you have that commentary, like now it's like a debate ends and they go to their panel, right? The studio panel, who's going to talk about break down everything that all the candidates said and give their report on, did they do well, did they not do well? All of that is then going to influence what people think that are viewed the debate themselves, but then are also having their views influenced by these paid commentators on these news organization channels. And overall, there's going to be less substance. So there's only so much news that happens in a day, right? And of course, you could cover like little micro stories about, I'm going to vote for this person because I'm in this town, and then factories are closing down, and they're promising to, bring back manufacturing jobs. You could listen to stories all day, but there's only so much news in a day for that in regards to elections. But news organizations and social media are going to be full to the brim all day, every day, especially in like national elections, of what people think about what happened, right? And so again, you get that more commentary. There's often less substance there. It's more of just like we're moving from fact-based reporting into opinion-based reporting. All right. Now whenever we think about these partisan news sites, also, these are again bringing us back to biased or ideological news coverage. Okay, so again, we're not really just reporting the facts. We are also adding in these sensational headlines and the ideology that we believe our viewers have on this website or on this blog or on this cable news channel that are playing up to a certain base. Now, whenever we think about challenges to modern day news consumption, a lot of these things we've kind of talked about within bias, but the other thing is you've seen it in your lifetime. This is all you've really known is just so many different sources that you could go to for your news, for your election coverage. And so choosing and being aware of the bias that exists in those media choices is also very important. It's not bad to, see, go to multiple different news sites, which you in fact should, so you can kind of get some different perspectives. But it's often overwhelming for people to like, well, where do I go? Like, who can I trust, right? Because there's just so many out there. You also have ideologically, there we go, oriented programming or selective exposure. Now, this is going back to bias, right? Selective exposure is just kind of another way to say that what you choose to put in front of people with, and their news organizations know the demographic of the people who tend to view their site or watch their channel or read their articles or read their Twitter posts, whatever it is. And so that selective exposure is just another way of describing that you are hand picking and choosing what you tell your viewers and how you tell your viewers that story. Now, this, as far as the people who are consuming that, we tend to seek out media that agrees and echoes our beliefs personally. There's only so long you can watch somebody that you disagree with, right? Unless you just that's kind of your thing. I don't know. But it's funny, like I challenge you to, if you have access to like a cable news channel or something, and you can flip back and forth between like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox. If there's like a major thing going or an election going on, or just some like big event, they're all going to be covering the same thing, and just kind of like go back and forth between them and see they're talking about the same exact event, the same exact facts sometimes, and yet they're talking about it in two completely different ways. One of them could be like demonizing something that happens, and the other one's talking about how great it is. So it just depends on what they want to show you and how they frame it. But we oftentimes choose to view the one more often that we agree with, right? Which is human nature. But again, you don't want to run into that echo chamber reality. Now, with consumer-driven media outlets, they are businesses. They have to stay afloat, except for things like public radio, like NPR, that receives donations from members and funding from the government, right? Like PBS, public broadcasting, they're funded by government money. These are driven by people who are trying to make money, right, off of what they're reporting. The amount of viewers they have, things like that, affects how much their bottom line, whether or not they get to keep their jobs and their salaries. So with that, the overall goal is money, right? So they want to keep people coming back. They want things sensationalized. So it's money, not necessarily journalism all the time. There's a reason they don't just repeat the news over and over again. It's because people would say like, "Oh, I've already seen this. I'm going to go somewhere else." So that's whenever they report the news, then they transition over to just opinion-based journalism, right? This sensationalized, just opinion segments that people are like, yeah, they're talking about the news, but they're going to be talking about it in a way that I haven't heard before and like their opinions. So you also have another challenge would be social media. And that, of course, leads to polarization. If you get locked in, right, to an echo chamber that is just giving you the same thing over and over again, it is going to like really cement you in that perspective and not open you to other perspectives. But it's also another thing it's going to do is it's going to um, lead you oftentimes to, go to be an internet warrior against people that you see on social media that you don't agree with. And people who tend to be nastier online than they are face to face. I'm sure you've experienced that. And lastly, uncertainty of credibility. So this comes down to what are the sources that those people that you're taking the media in from, what are their sources? What have they fact checked their info? Probably not if it's just some kind of social media post, right? They're just kind of giving their opinion. And if you take it as fact, then and you don't know where they got that information, then you can be led astray. So oftentimes, like people talk about credibility and is it fake, right? Is it fake news? So um, this is something that you have to deal with on a permanent basis now, especially if you're getting your media from other places, right? Especially like social media, internet blogs, just other not really journalists, like professional journalism websites. So these are things that you need to look out for whenever you're considering what is the news that you're consuming and how are they trying to maybe influence you or play up to who you are, what you believe, or at least what they think you believe in elections. So remember, the main goal is all of this affects voter participation, right? So if something is affecting voter participation and undermining the democratic processes of our country, that is something we need to be very aware of.